Disney animation is not in a good situation right now in terms of producing short form content. I do not simply mean that TV shows aren't as good coming out of Disney as they used to be, like what's happening with the movies. I mean that Disney has no idea right now what kind of TV shows they want to make, or even if they want to keep making TV shows at all. Disney Plus has demonstrated a quite marked shift away from original animated series recently, and those that did air on Disney Plus were not really received that well. And meanwhile, something like Moana 2, which is thoroughly mediocre, but that was switched mid production from an animated series to a movie, and it made a ridiculous amount of money at the box office. And then, after making that ridiculous amount of money, it came to Disney Plus and can succeed there. Disney has grown more and more cautious about launching things right onto Disney Plus, like what happened in the pandemic. You had a lot of great Pixar films, including Turning Red and Soul, just launched right onto Disney Plus. And they did all right there, but they didn't do as well as something like Encanto, which was something that started on Disney as a theatrical release, and then only after that was it released to Disney Plus, and it was a huge hit on Disney Plus. Disney has discovered that there's not really a benefit to releasing things on Disney Plus first, when they can just have movies air theatrically, make money, and then make just as much of a splash on Disney Plus. But that leaves animated shows in a bit of a weird position. Not because they're animated necessarily, but because they are TV shows. TV shows are not going to be released theatrically to a wide audience. That's just not how that works. They would air on Disney Plus first. And that would be the main mode of consumption. But also, TV shows that are animated can be expensive if you are spending a lot of money to animate them and make them look as good as Disney theatrical features or really anything close to that. And there's not really a good guarantee on the return on investment in the same way as a Disney big movie. So there are live action shows being produced for Disney Plus that seem to do alright. At least some of the Star Wars ones do. And there are animated movies being released to Disney Plus after a theatrical run, but Disney animated TV shows really don't have a big place nowadays. Animated TV seems lost right now across the board after streaming absolutely took over everything, and the cable TV model doesn't really work anymore. And everyone just seems to be scrambling. No one seems to have an answer for what to do to keep TV animation relevant. And this is especially sad for Disney, which started in these short animations. The first Disney movies were just very short. They were little sketches, little vignettes. Mickey Mouse or Goofy or whoever There would be jokes, there would be some character moments, but it would be very self-contained. Sometimes a bunch of these would be packaged together and shown theatrically. But it's only later with Snow White that you see the big Disney animated theatrical movies. If you haven't read about the making of Snow White, I highly recommend it. It was an absolutely gargantuan process and a true milestone in the history of filmmaking. I really recommend the Gabler biography on Walt Disney if you haven't read it. It gives a very good rundown of a lot of elements of Disney's career, including the making of Snow White. And when TV became a major form of media in the 1950s, Disney was one of the first movie gurus to vehemently endorse it. A lot of the old school studio heads were very reticent to look at TV because they knew that it was a direct competitor with the movies and would likely mark a significant downturn for their business models, which it did. Moviegoing was never as big after the introduction of television. People used to go to the movies very, very often back in the golden age of Hollywood. But Disney, he loved innovation, he loved discovery, he loved technology, and he really embraced animation. Because of that interest in the 20s and 30s, and he really embraced television for that reason in the 1950s. So Disney has a long history in short form animation and in television. The golden age of Disney animated TV was probably in the Disney Channel era in the 90s and 2000s, when there was this dedicated cable TV channel that needed programming, and so there was a big appetite for animated shows that the kids would enjoy. Now, these are not the animated marvels that Disney is best known for. A lot of these were made on the cheap. The animation isn't great, the storylines are repetitive, but that's true of a lot of animated TV. And that is nonetheless an art form in its own right. It is an art form that can lead to a lot of creativity and a lot of discovery. And it did for a while. Even in my lifetime, when I was growing up, I enjoyed shows like Gravity Falls that were hilarious, smart, thoughtful, clever. We're really doing a lot in a sophisticated way. And that model worked for a long time. It coincided partly with what I refer to as animated television's most recent golden age. Not its only golden age, but a truly stellar period in the history of the form, lasting from, say, the Avatar: The Last Airbender, original Teen Titans era in the mid-aughts, all the way to around a few years ago, say 2020, 2021. Disney was a large part of that renaissance. The Disney Channel was a large part of that renaissance as well. And when cable TV as a medium started declining after being overwhelmed by streaming, there was not really a viable alternative. There was not really an idea for where TV should go. for Disney after the demise, slow but inevitable, of the Disney Channel. Now, Disney still kept trying to make good animated shows, even in the streaming era. The critic Raymond Williams talks very thoughtfully about residual and emerging discourses that exist alongside the dominant discourse of a day. It is not simply, for Williams, as linear as, oh, one era completely supersedes the other. We go from everyone being a flapper and going to Great Gatsby parties in the 20s to everyone being poor and suffering and writing songs about the working class in the 30s, to being dedicated for the war in the 40s, to being affluent and domestic oriented in the 50s, to being very rebellious and countercultural in the 1960s. That's not really how the world works. Life isn't linear like that. Williams understood that. Whatever we associate with the dominant ethos of the day is not the only ethos that existed in that day. There are the rumblings of other ideas, other ways of thinking about the world. Not better, necessarily, unless you want to imply this constant linear progress. That's not really historically accurate. But different ways of understanding the relations between human beings and what really matters and what should be valued. But there's also the residual, the lingering iconography and images and narratives from a previous age that nonetheless still have a lot of power. For instance, people don't live in an agrarian society in America, certainly not in England, and haven't for a long time, especially in England, and yet nonetheless, the motif of the natural environment, of really venerating this pastoral ideal, this past life lived in communion with nature before industrialization, that still has a lot of rhetorical appeal. Things work like that. In the same way, even though the technological and cultural landscape was changing beneath the feet of the Disney Corporation, they kept on making good, thoughtful animated shows that tie back to that golden age, so associated with the Disney Channel. Shows like Amphibia and The Owl House are personal favorites of mine. These are shows that are good in a very specific way that could only exist when they did. They are very progressive in a lot of ways, not just in terms of having references to gay couples and the like, although, yes, that too, but just in terms of narratively speaking and the kinds of ideas that they're willing to test out. They are much more adventurous, I would say, than your average standard Disney animated show from the 90s. But nonetheless, they are kept aloft by the dying fragments of that old ecosystem, that old world where people would sit down in front of the TV and watch Disney Channel on cable. That world has fallen apart completely now. We probably will not see another Owl House or another Amphibia, sadly. But what are we going to see? That is a more difficult problem to consider. But I can tell you what it won't be. It won't be TV that is just acting like a longer movie. There's nothing wrong with a good miniseries, but the strengths of TV as a medium are fundamentally different from the strengths of film as a medium. If Moana 2 had been a television show, it would have been kind of bad because it just would have felt like a rather stretched out movie. A bit more episodic than that, but still just one story that's been stretched out a bit. Because the two mediums have different strengths. And what ended up happening with Moana 2 was a kind of hybrid, awkward thing that doesn't really feel like full dramatic TV, full with episodic storytelling, or like a full dramatic movie that is more cohesive. The two mediums are different, and they should be treated differently. Something like Gravity Falls or The Owl House, making that many episodes was work. It took a lot of time and effort, but it is nonetheless less expensive and less elaborate to produce than a fully expensively animated Disney movie. There is more of a trend toward simplification. Instead of trying to awe people with animation, animation is used as a vehicle for the story and for the characters and the little episodic journeys that they undergo in every episode. That is what animation in television can do at its best. It is a fundamentally different medium from animated film. Disney, I believe, was trying to blur the lines between the two, and the result was some rather awkward projects. I don't think a lot of these big budget Disney Plus animated movies or animated shows really lived up to their potential because they really were not sure what they were. Disney TV needs to really understand what worked for it in the past and, yes, acknowledge that trying to find a way to make animated TV work in a streaming landscape is difficult and is different from on cable. But animated TV has its own strengths, and those shouldn't just be tossed away or ignored. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can, and you want to see more videos just like this one before anyone else. What do you see as the future for Disney animated TV? It seems like a dark time for it now. Take care, everyone. Adios, comrades.